funny being here. I'm the only non-member of the family.
Oh, well, that's okay. We'll let you in.
You know the family better than we do.
Yeah, you know.
Well, the way things happened was I, in university, was digging ditches for the Conservation Authority for a few summers, and then they had a job. They wanted a museum opened in a month one summer. I think it was 1975. And a friend and I somehow lucked out on that job. We didn't even apply. We just were told that's what we would be doing. And we felt pretty good about it. And the unfortunate part was we had absolutely no information at all. And so I recall that we went to visit Bill McRae and Mrs. Abbott. And we were in touch with Anne Ferguson up in Cumberland near Ottawa. And I think that that was how we started. And since then, we spent several years sort of compiling. We got hired on for a couple of years after we both finished university. Then we went out and got some real jobs. And the Leith family has been a very, very interesting family because, you know, they came to Canada and they were lovely and literate, and they wrote letters and diaries, and many of the family was good enough to share those with us. And so I may actually be a person who has more information on my computer about the family because I've been lucky enough to receive things from just about everybody. So I don't know how basic I should be here. I think people mostly know about the family, that George Leith was the son of Major General Sir George
Gordon Brown.
I've got some notes here because I thought I might not remember after church. Sir George Leith, and he came to Canada in the 1830s.
41.
Oh, not yet. It was 1834 actually, and came and settled in Binbrook, which is just the other side of Hamilton, up on the mountain. And he stayed a few years there, and his parents and his wife both died in the same month, and so he went back to Scotland, and a couple of years later married Eleanor Ferrier, who came from a family that I would say, I hate to say it, but to the Leiths, but the Ferriers were perhaps even more distinguished than the Leiths. Susan Ferrier was Scotland's answer to Jane Austen, and that was her aunt. And her uncle was John Wilson, who wrote for the Blackwoods magazine in Edinburgh. Very famous people. You can look them up in any standard biographical dictionary. And that sort of love of writing seemed to really pass down through the family. Maybe it's still there. I don't know. But George and Eleanor had 4 children in Scotland. There was Margaret Leith, who married John Wright later on. They had no children. There was Jemima, who married John's brother Matthew, and they had a lot of children, 8 or 9, I think. There was Charlotte, who married Matthew Council, and they had 6 or 7 children, I believe. There was Alec, who married Mary Edis from Toronto, and they had just 2 daughters, but produced many of the people who are here today. And there was Alma, of course, who did marry Stair Dick Lauder and had no children, and is perhaps the most interesting one of the whole bunch.
I'd like to elaborate on that.
And they eventually, after George's father's will got settled, and there was a sort of an amicable lawsuit about that dragged on for 12 years. And he said amicable in quote marks, and so I suspect it probably wasn't.
Yeah.
But they arrived in Canada in the early 1850s with £20,000, and that was a lot of money. It cost them about 2,000 of those pounds to acquire and build this place. So they, I think, were likely pretty well set for the rest of their life.
Did he build the Hermitage, or did he buy the Hermitage?
It had been a cleared farm, called the Hermitage, and it had been, there was a small frame house down the hill. He bought it and then started building this stone place. I don't know how long it took. He was a great diary keeper during his years in Binbrook and during his years in Scotland, and then he stopped when he came to Canada. Or if he did keep going, I guess we haven't seen it. I've certainly not seen the diary. His diary that he did keep, though, is in the public archives up in Ottawa, and or a copy of it. I'm not sure if the original is up there. It's really very interesting.
I think I have the original.
Have you?
I think so.
Yeah, there was a copy put up in the public archives in Ottawa for anybody to be able to read. And then when they were here, Alma was born in Hamilton. They moved out here. I think that they spent most of their winters in town because this was a pretty isolated place. You know, when we're writing up about the Hermitage, I'll often mention, you know, some of the beautiful possessions, but that seems a little pointless since you folks own them. But I'm sure you know what they are. But I mean, there was a Rayburn portrait of the Major General here, drawings by Hogarth and Archer.
Who got that?
Where they get them?
They weren't destroyed in the fire?
No.
No.
No, they weren't.
Somebody's holding it.
They're still around. I'm not sharing that information. And I know that there was a set of china that had come when the Major General was the first governor of Penang, which is near Malaysia. Peacocks are painted on the plates, and I think that probably a number of these things did survive because, of course, Alma didn't get everything. So
She didn't deserve any.
Okay. So what this was a working farm, and they owned at the height about 500 acres. This whole area that I guess you walked up along from the lodge, I think that was open ground and it was landscaped parkland. We were pretty excited when we thought we had a lead on one of the first Ontario landscape architects who had done this design, but we couldn't actually link him here. His name is George Lang, and he did a number of local projects, and it seemed like there was every reason to think he may have laid out the grounds here, but so far we can't prove that. So I don't know. I mean, I wasn't quite sure what I should tell you, but you know, you're probably wondering kind of what they did when they lived here. So I just had a couple of quotes from some letters, and I know none of you have these because I own the originals, and they came to me in a very roundabout route from somebody who's not in the family. And you know, if anybody were interested in copies of these, I have about 75. I'd be happy to, you know, transfer them to a computer disk and get them to your email, or well, I guess probably don't want to email 75 of them. But what happened was Alma did get married. Her parents weren't very happy with that. In fact, they stopped talking to her for 2 years. And she lived in Ancaster. And her husband was Stair Dick Lauder, and his grandfather was the Earl of Stair, who was one of the 10 wealthiest men in the British Isles at the time. So after a while, they decided to go back and see if he could maybe get a job, because he had been driving the stagecoach between Ancaster and Hamilton.
What happened to all the money?
Well, he didn't have any. You see, his grandfather had quite a lot, so they went back and were schmoozing around for a couple of years, and nobody offered them a job at all. But they had a wonderful time, and she wrote just incredible amounts of words. She could easily write 5,000 words in a letter back home. Easily. It's reams. It's unbelievable how much she would write. And some of these were preserved. So I just thought you might like to know the type of family they came from. And she decided to go see Oxenford Castle, which is where the Earl of Stair lived, and she wrote this back to her sister Jemima. And I have to cut this down because it's really pretty long, even though I've trimmed it down pretty badly. We arrived just in the dusk and were received by a perfect crowd of servants in the hall, past whom I walked with great dignity, preceded noiselessly by the most awful of them, the head butler, who is exactly like a London consulting physician. Up a number of broad steps and out of the hall into a long gallery, to a door which he threw open and announced us in a voice which was evidently meant to be affable and encouraging, and so landed us in the library, all furnished with light oak and crimson leather, and here before a very lovely fire, Lady Stair and Lady Dalrymple, her daughter-in-law, were sitting. So then she does talk a little bit about what life was like there, and breakfast was at 9:30, and then after that everyone could do exactly as they pleased. Lady Stair and I got to be great friends. They said she liked me because I was not afraid of her, as so many people are. So there is where either my lack of self-consciousness or superabundance of colonial cheek came in, whichever you like to call it. Then she went off to London with the family and talked about this. We had a busy day on Tuesday. First Lady Dalrymple sent a note asking me to come and see her in her court dress if I wished. So I wished, and we set off across the park to Rutland Gate, which is close to Knightsbridge Barracks. It was a warm sunny day and London was looking its very best. We were received by Jackie, and presently Susan came sweeping in, looking so lovely in a beautiful white satin with rich brocaded satin train. After that we got into a hansom and drove furiously to Buckingham Palace, where the crowd was immense and a long line of swell carriages already formed. So she had a pretty good time in London too. You might be interested in, especially the McRae side of the family, what they were doing when Alma was over in England having a great time. Alex had just passed his examinations as a barrister, and they moved to Bowmanville. And so Jemima went down there for a little visit, and this is what she's talking about them. This is such a nice old-fashioned house, red brick with a row of trees in front, a brick wall surrounding part of the ground which gives it a very respectable appearance. You enter up some steps and sideways into a porch with 2 windows in it, into a nice hall, on the right-hand side of which is the drawing room, very nicely furnished with gold damask and peacock green or blue plush. Sounds nice, yeah. The hours are very pleasant and human. Breakfast at 9 or half past, lunch at 2, and dinner at 7. I don't mean that these hours are kept by the general public, but in this house. Alec won't give in to the Canadian fashion of early dinners, which shows his sense. Mary is a very good housekeeper, and they've got a very good servant, so that everything is very comfortable. Mary has a very pretty velvet dress with a long train for evening wear, but she was told it would be thought very funny if she wore it here, as nobody ever wore trains. I suppose the truth is none of them have any to wear. And she also talks about what they ate, and that's always kind of interesting, you know, because I think it's more interesting now, but this is what they had to eat. The guests arrived by an early train, so Mary and Alec went down to the station to meet them, leaving me to boss the breakfast. I must tell you what I made, as I know that you take an interest in my feeble attempts at cooking. I suspect that she wasn't actually cooking, she was just telling people what to cook. Yeah. The materials I had to work with were the remains of a cold leg of mutton and some eggs, so I made some elegant little cutlets of the former, which I crumbed, put a soupçon of onion and parsley into the crumbs and fried very delicately in butter. Then I made an omelette aux fines herbes with a fine melon and some hot rolls, made a very appetizing breakfast. And then she talks about lunch. Ned Cahoon lunched with us yesterday. I gave him a nice wholesome lunch, as I know he dislikes indigestible food. Oxtail soup, a broiled steak and oyster sauce, and a nice little bit of cold corned beef, chocolate blancmange, and celery and cheese. So that sounds quite digestible. And and I have something that Jemima writes about her own family, just for you folks. She was really very interesting. You know, reading these letters, I always thought Victorian ladies sort of faded away in a drawing room somewhere. But Jemima was sitting out in the garden with a pint of Guinness when she was writing this stuff. But I suspect that her hosts were joining her. They really seem to. I think they sound like such interesting people. I have to share this with you because it's a slur against the Presbyterians in general and the church that I work at in particular. So this is more than a century ago. So, this is Jemima writing. Do you know, I never knew how I hated this country till I came to Hamilton, and I certainly do hate it, which is a pity, as I have no prospect of getting out of it. If it wasn't for St. Mark's Church, I think I would die. I never felt before so completely what it is to be in a place and not of it. If you are not a rich snob, you can have nothing in common with anyone here, particularly if you don't sit in the Ascension Church, now that's an Anglican one, or Central Presbyterian. And then she goes and talks about a wedding at Central Presbyterian, and this was, I believe, related to the councils. I'd have to figure out how, but so Tom Stinson was married last Wednesday in the Central Presbyterian Church. I was rather amused at the way in which they arranged matters to suit all parties. Mr. Hope wanted the wedding to take place in the drawing room, and I wish I could do the accent because I'm sure she was quite clever. But you know, dear, Tom would never consent to be married anywhere but in church. For however, he gave in so far as he was married in a Presbyterian church, as if there was any particular difference between a Presbyterian drawing room and a Presbyterian church. Mama and Minnie went to see the performance and came back exclaiming at the vulgarity of the appearance of the guests. I wasn't surprised. Mrs. Martin was clad in wine-colored satin, skin-tight, and looked awful. Mrs. McGivern looked very well and was very handsomely dressed, and I hate to say that this is about Mrs. Council. She wore her everlasting black silk and last winter's bonnet. And here's what they got for wedding presents. They were very numerous and costly, about 150, 7 table covers of various denominations, and 6 silver marmalade pots. Jane Stinson gave them a house and a piano, a horse and a piano, and Mrs. McGivern furnished the drawing room in ebony and crimson plush. I guess that was nice. And just one last little quote. Again, this is, and this may very well pertain to the people who are up from Rhode Island. This is Jemima Wright talking about her son Percy, and she called him Bunny, and he's been having a row and has left the choir, as he says, for good. But I think he's dying to go back, only his pride prevents him, I suppose. He wants the whole choir, with Mr. Sutherland at their head, to come and beg him to come back. On the evening of Easter Sunday, there seemed to be rather a scramble for surplices, as there were more boys than usual, and Bunny could not get his own. He objected to the one giving him, and he was going out of the vestry when Mr. Burkett called him back, and desired him to put on all his things at once. He came back and took a hymn book belonging to the boy who had his surplice, threw it across the room, and sent the leaves flying in all directions, upon which the boy proceeded to kick him when they were just forming the procession. Bunny had no time to return the kick, but he said when he came home that he should not go back, and I told him he'd better stay away till he could control his temper a little better. The best of the joke is that there is to be a choir supper on Thursday night, to which he can't go, of course. So, you know, what happened here afterwards, George Leith died in 1887, and Eleanor lived on here, I think, with Alex and Mary and their family when they weren't living in Toronto, and she died in 1900, and Alex had died just a few years before that, and so I believe that the house was going to be sold, and Alma didn't feel that she wanted that to happen. So she bought it and lived here for another 40 years. I think she died in 1942. And the house had burned a few years before that, in the mid-30s. And but she continued to live on here. I'm sure many of you, or some of you anyway, remember that.
What was left after the fire?
Well, I think that the front wall was there was more of it there, and I think that all of the walls were standing at one point, but then this back wall took a tumble. These buildings were in really bad shape. Well, there were so many of them, and you probably, maybe you don't know, that back one was a laundry.
Well, that's a laundry
There
back there?
are 2 rooms in it. There is a chicken pen in those bushes. It's a stone building. This long one was a carriage house, woodshed, privies, and
Privies were up there?
yeah, up in there. The kitchen was that wing on the right. Now Craig and I never quite agreed on this, because he thought that this little wing out the back had been designed as a nursery, but for the children, and I thought that was kind of stupid. But you know, I did run into something in one of the letters that said that maybe that it was. I remember just after it was excavated, there isn't a basement under the whole thing, just sort of about 1/3 of it in this corner. That they found quite a number of wine bottles. I mean, a whole cellar full.
No doubt.
Who got those?
And so I think there also are some pictures of the interior of the house, and I think they're down in the museum. When you came in the front door, there was a double drawing room on the right and a dining room on the left, and that's about all we know. I know Craig sort of came up with some floor plans, but he would admit that he was guessing too. So he actually wanted to send me his greetings. He and his wife live down in Kingston. We still sort of chat a lot, but this was he's a, pardon me?
What's his last name?
Sims, and this place here started Craig being a restoration architect, which is what he is. And
So right near.
What's his wife's name? Is it Janice?
Yeah, do you know her?
They're neighbors.
Their neighbor.
Do they know you're here too?
No, I don't know them well, but
They
we
live in
in Berryfield.
yeah,
That's where we
little-
live too. Yeah, yeah.
That was fun.
So Auntie Alma actually lived here
yes,
for all of those.
that's right.
And that's how Ken ended up in the gatehouse.
I think that's right.
They were
Which house is Alma's house in Ancaster still around? Or?
No, it was taken down about 25 years ago. It was called Fountain Hall, and I don't even know how to explain where it was, because it's behind the old post office. But
Oh, right in behind the stone building, in the middle of Ancaster.
yeah,
Right across the road and back in the lane.
right from the
Called
old
Fountain Hall.
hotel. Yeah. No, it was taken down for a telephone building about 25 years ago.
Now, what's the real reason this place burnt down? We've heard various reasons why it burnt down. Did they ever know? Was it a little bit of drinking and smoking, or was it?
No, she was having a dinner party, or a luncheon party rather, and I think that the fire caught up in the second story when they were downstairs. So
What happened in the daytime?
yeah, and they got quite a lot of things out.
Well, when it was still up, Paul.
How old
know-
was she when she died?
She was born in 1854, and she died in 1942. 88.
88. Did she die in the woods? I'd always heard that.
I don't know.
I heard she died in the woods in her nightgown.
Probably.
I hadn't heard that.
If she ever, before it burned down, if she invited you for a meal, dinner, it was really very interesting.
Yeah,
Because any number of animals would be flocking around the table, You know, the
wasn't
chicken
dogs
was
or
at
cats.
the end of the table.
Where was the horse buried?
The horse actually came in
Oh,
the
the
front door.
horse is buried right out in the, right outside the front door. Isn't it? There was a carriage sweep that came up, and he was buried right in the middle. It was an Arabian named Me Too.
That was her.
She was a very
Oh,
accomplished
sometimes.
She left in her will she was to be buried with the horse.
Yeah, right.
Yes, but they didn't.
She had a lot of animals in the house.
And we weren't talking cats and dogs.
What a strange family.
She was buried. She revised
Sneak out of here.
her horse more than she revised her husband.
Yeah,
Right? Yeah,
that's true, I think.
I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
He seemed like quite a nice fellow, and
Oh, I
Yeah,
think
he's
so.
a nice
I
fellow.
think he is.
yeah, and Alec got him the job as the secretary at the Albany Club in Toronto. So I don't know. I mean, there's so many stories about the family because they've left so much written down. Unfortunately, they didn't seem to have left anything written down about how this place was built, or you know how those plans were made, and that's kind of too bad because that would have certainly been pretty interesting. But I haven't seen it yet.
Why did they come out from Scotland in the first place? If they had all that money, why would they bother?
Well, I think maybe the first time he came out, he didn't have all that much because his father was still alive. I mean, he seemed to have an adequate amount, but
what made him came? Why leave it all?
I think
He's that kind of guy.
I think he really liked it here.
Yeah, he did.
I think he
It was
did.
just less structured society and so on. I don't know, and I mean, maybe £20,000 wouldn't have been too much to cut a dash back home, but it sure did a good job here. I don't know. I'm only guessing.
He liked when he was in.
£20,000 could
He
have.
liked
He could have.
doing things and arranging with the local people.
He could have gone along with that.
Yeah.
Steamship.
Yes. He actually worked too. I think he enjoyed getting out and cutting trees and things like that.
Talking of trees.
He had a brewery in Ancaster. No, not Ancaster, but
Dundas?
In Dundas. Yeah.
yeah.
And it didn't last very long before he dissolved the partnership,
That's right.
but he was pretty astute, and I wondered if maybe he thought that this wasn't doing very well, and better get out before it went down the drain. He was in partnership with the Wrights, I believe.
And then that brewery, do you know where that brewery was exactly?
Well, off the top of my head, I can't remember if it was
Dundas?
in Dundas, or was it in Dundas,
Yeah.
or was it one that was local right around the
No,
springs
it
here?
was in Dundas. He had trouble with all the help.
In Dundas,
The
I
help
always
was all
heard.
the drinking. It wasn't Dundas, but I'd love to find out where in Dundas.
I don't know. I could look and see if I've got that.
Yeah?
I've got something talking about the partnership being dissolved.
Yeah.
One thing, too, that the house is gone, but when Jemima got married, he had a big place built for them, and she just walked out the end of the road across the Sulphur Springs, called Deer Spring, the huge house.
It's still there?
No, it burned about the turn of the century. It had been turned into a hotel, but I've got a bill of sale from the next owner, and it details the contents of the rooms, and the place was just really enormous. It was still called Deer Spring. Yeah. That was a sort of a wedding present for Jemima, I think.
She was the first to get married.
Yes, she
Jemima
was.
the first one.
Yeah.
And are the ruins there? Is there?
No, the Leith used to be the bricks to build a new house. So the house that's on the property now, it's still an older house, but it's nothing original.
Is there something to the Sulphur Springs? Is that
Like,
relevant?
there's a trail. Is that what you mean? Like how to get there?
There was a hotel there.
Yeah.
You
Deer
know,
Spring
it was turned into a hotel. It was
Oh, was
one
that
of,
the Sulphur Springs Hotel?
George had the house built for one of his children first of all, didn't he?
Right.
And then it was turned into.
I imagine that having it turned into a hotel right near this place was
Not
just a fate worse than death. Right.
Oh, not everybody likes the Sulphur Springs, but just the same, it's very nice.
Yeah, if you haven't tasted it, you should do that.
We can imagine.
When Eleanor Ferrier married George Gordon Brown Leith, she came from a home in Scotland. It's called Bellside. And we found that because we have a family picture of that home. And there is now a bed and breakfast in Scotland. And you can stay there. We have the information if anybody would be interested in it. Yeah.
Now, someone has a picture here of their house on Vine, their winter home. Yeah, the winter home. You've got the we should get that recorded. The annals.
Is that house still standing?
No, it's now a parking. But there's a picture of where they stayed here in the summertime and lived on Vine Street in the winter.
Well, I've got a better picture than that.
You haven't seen this one yet. This is James and Vine.
He married his first wife, and she died after the trip.
buried at sea. Her name was Marina.
Buried at sea, yes.
Is that James? James and Vine.
The second one.
Yeah.
Is that 268? I don't think it's turned down. I think it's turned into Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, I think it was pretty recent.
Transported.
Well, I'd just like to thank Paul. He will be around.